Did your parents notice that when you sort of fell into a doze and voices came by?
Well,
They understood.
yes. Well, actually, I can't in a way answer that question for the simple reason that my parents were separated soon after I was, well, very soon after I was born. My mother went one direction, my father went in another, and I was brought up by my grandmother, who could neither read nor write. I was brought up in the dire poverty of the 20s, and I don't think my grandmother even realized or understood or would be known what it's all about. I mean, I had psychic experiences as a child. I used to sometimes see people, and I assumed that everybody else could see what I saw, but it wasn't until much later, when recounting an experience I had as a child, when I saw sitting beside my grandmother, or rather standing beside my grandmother, who was sitting on my return from school in her usual wicker armchair, doing some sewing, and I saw this woman standing beside her. And as I approached the kitchen where my grandmother was sitting, the woman disappeared. And I was so surprised, and I said, "Oh, Granny," I said, "that woman, she's gone." And my grandmother looked at me, and she said, "What woman?" And she said, "What she looked like?" So I described her, and my granny went as white as white. And she told me not to talk like, say those sort of things, that's silly. And I learned by experience, if ever I saw anything or had any unusual experience as a child, I keep my mouth shut, because it usually made me kind of cross the ear hole. But that's how it was as a child, anyway. No, who's next? Has anyone got it? No. I'll take that other. No, no, one. I'll come back.
Okay.
The boy behind you. Excuse me, for you a boy, you're a young man.
Have you ever made contact with H.G. Wells?
Have I done what?
Ever made contact with H.G. Wells or Sir Arthur Conan Doyle?
Well, Doyle, yes, Arthur has been through on rare occasions way back, and I find my memory serves me right. I think it was before we had tape recordings.
Yes.
But H.G. Wells, no. You see, another thing, I mean, one could go into depth on this, and I don't want to take too much time on one question, but that's not fair to the rest. But all manner of kind of people obviously do come back. And although it's often publicised, whether it's psychic news or what have you, they obviously cotton on to a name, like the Sunday Mirror cottoned on to Marilyn Monroe when they did an article about it. But for every Marilyn Monroe or H.G. Wells or Doyle, hundreds and hundreds of very ordinary people have been through and spoken to their relations and so on. This business of famous personalities is always a little almost embarrassing, quite frankly. I always feel a wee bit embarrassed. I mean, I'm human enough to be pleased, obviously, if some very famous person comes through and speaks to someone they don't all that. But when a famous person has passed over, so much has been written about them, so much has been publicised about them, that one always sort of feels, oh, well, you know, so much has been written and read about that person that it could be, but is it, you know? That's why when someone comes through who is famous, gives some information which has never been published, which is very personal to members of the family, which they can accept as being evidential. That's when I'm happy and thrilled about personality. Although they're intelligent and what they've got to say. I mean, it doesn't really matter in a sense whether they're famous or infamous in a sense. It's what subject matter they've got to talk about. That's the main point. If they give an interesting discourse or an uplifting talk which brings you a little away from the material into the psycho-spiritual, then so well and so good. No, I haven't had H.G. Wells. What was it you wanted, Rob?
I just wondered, when you have these failed sittings, and I'm glad to hear that you do, the same reasons as yourself, actually, we don't take it for granted then, are you, say, at the next sitting, proffered an explanation as to why the previous one failed?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, and I'm sure you'll agree on this one thing above all else, and I certainly do. Although mediums are human beings on this side, mediums and no mediums can be catchy about about each other and unfriendly and bitchy. I've never had anyone from the other side come through and say anything unkind about anybody. There may have been a sitting where perhaps there was someone who, in fact even unconsciously, threw a stab in the works, to put it crudely. And on a few rare occasions, I've had Dr. Marshall or one of my helpers come through and say, oh, you had a certain person here last week when we couldn't benefit. Never have that person again. They've never said why, they've never said anything against that person, and this is absolutely true. There are certain types of individuals, they're not necessarily bad people, but their attitude or their approach is wrong. They don't even realise it, and I'm sympathetic towards them. And in fact, I've had many an argument over at school by certain individuals, and very old friends of mine have said, listen, I don't know why you ever give that person a sitting. And I said, well, you know, they usually get a very good result, and they seem, I'm not going to get but you see, I like analytically minded people. I don't mind criticism. I'm not a welcome and rare, if it's sensible and intelligent criticism. And some of these people that do come again and again and again, who are not perhaps in some respects ideal sitters, but you know that once they have become convinced, they're going to do much more service than the gullible ones who sit every, well, I say that here, or anywhere, but except every Aunt Fanny and everything. Oh yes, friend, that's for me, I know that. You know, I mean, that's no good for anybody. If a thing is evidential and real and true, then it's of value, and the kind of person who's hard to convince turns out to be the best propagandist. Anyway, I've gone away again, as usual, to the point. You look like you want to ask me something, I don't know whether you do.
I don't interrupt, we would like to ask something. Yeah.
Well, just a minute.
Yeah,
It's
I'd like to
you.
know something of me.
I feel something with you, I don't know what it is, but have you got something you want to do?
Yes, I'd like to know about Mickey.
You'd like to do what?
Mickey, that boy, who's your guy.
Yeah, what about him?
Something about him. How he becomes your guy. How he becomes your guy.
How did he...
You told us that he's your guide or something.
Well, he's, I wouldn't call him a guide, I'd call him a helper, I suppose in a way he's like a compere. He comes and he chats people up, makes them laugh, takes away the tensions and the rise of the sounds, and then he helps people through. If somebody can't speak, he will say there's a lady here who says that she's so-and-so, or she wants that lady over there, and he'll transmit a message from one person on the other side to another. I'm not trying to sell you something, because my books are all out of print, unfortunately. But have you read my book?
No,
Well, you can get it from libraries. I believe they've got copies here in the library. Read the book. It will tell you a bit more about me, because I can't spend too long, as much as I like to. What was it you wanted?
Do you have sometimes entities from the other side of non-English origin, or speaking in voice?
Oh, well, yes, that's an interesting point you raised, a fascinating one, actually. I don't want to go into too much detail, because it takes too long a time. We have had, over the years, on occasion, individuals coming through speaking other languages. I don't know whether I should mention, but I can. I think it's no reason why I shouldn't. Some, roughly 2 years ago, two very dear friends of mine who were great opera fans brought Tito Gori, the great Italian singer. He was appearing at Covent Garden, and he was over there for several weeks, and he read my book, which had been published in Italian. And anyway, he came along, and I mean, I hadn't recognised him. I mean, I'm not going to say I didn't know who it was, because that would be stupid. I mean, if I knew, it would be stupid dog. But I don't speak Italian. I can say arrivederci or one or two other bits, and then I have to speak quickly, you know. But first time we said, we got nothing happened at all, and I think he was impressed by the fact that nothing happened. His wife was good. The second time, his father was good. And he also got his father singing a Neapolitan song that he sang to him when he was a little child. And he was so thrilled by this, because nobody knew when I said that no Neapolitan nursery rhyme that he just got his father's son who was a child. But what do you go to get on that? If you ask me deeper into this subject, I think I must be honest about this. One would always be honest if one can, as far as one can. But with psychic things, it's a strange thing, you know. Being completely and absolutely honest. Anyone wants to be. But the whole subject is so complex that you'll say something which is absolutely honest, and yet there is another interpretation which is almost opposite to what you have previously said. What I was trying to get at here is that I do think, to be honest about it, that it is more difficult for someone from the other side utilizing the powers of a medium who is English and doesn't know any other languages. This is another subtlety, you see. This subject is fascinating because of its subtleties. And although I don't think I consciously interfere with my phenomena or my mediumship, I am obviously somewhere along the line caught up with it. I don't think that a medium can be completely cut out. That's a little preface of what I'm really going to say. I think when someone on the other side, you see, on the other side, language is no barrier. They communicate entirely by the process of thought. All communication is a mental process. So when they come back and enter into a material condition, temporarily, they take on something of the old self in their attitude and their aspect and their way of thinking and their way of reacting. In other words, if they didn't take on aspects of the old self, we would never recognize them, possibly, in some cases, especially if they're very advanced. So a person coming, who, shall we say, was an Italian, coming down to the material level, would be then transmitting his thought force into the language with which he was most familiar. But the voice box, because I haven't gone into all this, because this evening leads to another evening's discussion and etc. But you see, the voices are artificially produced. We must get this into our heads. There are people who assume that the voices are the actual voices of the deceased person. Now, common sense tells you that couldn't possibly conceivably be, because what constituted your voice or my voice was the fact that when on Earth we were talking under normal natural conditions, using our own lungs, vibrating the atmosphere, and our brain was sending the message to our vocal organs, and we were vibrating the atmosphere, and we were creating sound, so that people could hear what we were trying to convey in a mental process, but audible by sound. So when someone comes from the other side, they are utilizing what is termed the ectoplasmic voice box, which is artificially produced from the substance, usually termed ectoplasm, which is drawn from the medium. And they utilize this temporary ectoplasmic voice box, and they manipulate this, and they vibrate that atmosphere, and we are hearing what they are trying to convey by their thought forces and activating this artificial reproducer. And what we are hearing is an artificially produced voice. That is why there are occasions when some voices have a tendency to sound a little rather like another voice. The subtleties are great. And then, of course, you'll get another voice which will be absolutely full of personality, completely different to any other voice you have during the session, and a voice which immediately is recognizable by the recipient. But that is more unusual than usual. But the point is that since all the voices are artificially produced, and the vibration in the circle and in the whole atmosphere around and about is English speaking, then the voice is much more likely to be transmitted, even if it's only in broken English. There again, it would also depend on the individual communicating. With Enrico he has been through to speak to Chico Gordon, and on other occasions, he speaks with a very broken Italian sort of Americanized accent, is the only way I can describe it. And he has come through with evidence of quite staggering some of it. But you can tell that he is Italian. And then all of a sudden in between the broken English will come an Italian word or a couple of words or part of a sentence. And the same with some of the French communicators. No, I don't know whether I should say it's more difficult for them to speak in a double language, if they were used to that language. Perhaps I'm assuming this, although I think it's true to say, I must be faithful about this, that 99% of all the communications through my mediumship are obviously English, because 99% of the people who sit with me are English speaking, and here or there you may get, or once I had a mark, I must talk about that. I'm taking up too much time on other people on that. But many years ago, when Peru was in Egypt and held sway, I had an Arab came to my door, rang my bell. All right, love, you got a bus to catch?
No, I'm terrible.
Oh, I'm sorry, I hope I didn't do it to you. Hope you should get rid of it. Don't tell me you've got a headache too. Oh, you're together. Anyway, good night and God bless.
Thank you.
And anyway, this Arab, who spoke perfectly, used to make an appointment, you know. In those days, I thought he told me if I had it. I mean, when looking back, I realised I was doing so well. But anyone who was in trouble or rang my bell or phoned me up, I would see them as possible, whenever possible. Anyway, to long story short, I arranged an appointment, and there were about 8 Arabs there, all very sort of, you know, you could tell that they were not just anymore. Didn't have to be psychic to feel and sense that they were important personages. They came in a huge Rolls Royce and all that. And I just sit there, because I don't go to trances as a rule. And the whole conversation consisted of Arabic. Now, I do not speak Arabic, obviously. I haven't a clue about Arabic. And every now and again I kept hearing, Peru. And I was having to flabbergasted with it. And quite frankly, when it was all over, I thought to myself, this is one of the most extraordinary things that ever happened to me. And all I know is that when it was finished, the man who arranged it, who was obviously the secretary, he came to me and he gave me £50, which never given me £50 in my life. You know? And in those days, my fees were a guinea or something. Anyway, I thought, well, I must have got something like 50 nickels, you know. The point is that it was obvious. And a few weeks later, Peru, you know, all this was happening way back, although older people did, and the whole situation with Peru collapsed and all that. But I always feel that they were conspiring against Peru, and whether the other side hoping to do that, I have a clue. But I have kept here in Peru and all this other strange places. Anyway, I'm not deviated. Who's next? Yeah, I'll ask you, what do you want?
I'm interested, you mentioned about the voice box earlier on. I wondered if any scientists had actually taken infrared pictures of it at all, and if they'd been published.
Well, yes, yes and no, here we go again.
Yeah.
When I did a series of tests for Sunday Express, I could go into that on it and take far too long, but the science editor, George Chapman, he sat in I allowed him to sit in my private home circle. That's when I had a private home circle for roughly a year. And I'm not going into the detail of the evidence. This is one thing. Anyway, then it was discussed that it would be interesting if I gave a series of tests, and they used everything. EMI supplied them with the equipment, infrared telescopes, infrared cameras, you name it, they had it, and their own technicians to work the mechanism. And also, Professor Bennett from Columbia University came over with his wife, also sat, and they took Professor Bennett we have got one photograph which has never been published because for various reasons, but I think the main reason is that I don't think it was reproduced very well, where you can see the ectoplasm forming on my shoulder, and it's in the process of building. It's not fully formed. That is the only picture, to my knowledge. There may have been others like the problem 5 years ago with other groups who never even showed you the pictures, but that is the only one. At some time we can get some copies made if you want.
No, it'd be very interesting, actually.
Oh, they can have it. No, who's next? Well, that, yes, you, sir.
During the recording, Ellen Perry mentioned that there were souls around her. With your analytical mind, hasn't this sort of prompted you to sort of try and discover more about what the soul is, etc.? Is it conceivable, in fact, that it is thought?
Well, you put me on the spot in a way, because I'm really in a way not. I don't kill myself anyway, quick answer the question. I'm not going to pretend something I don't, that I know and I don't. But I think her terminology, being the kind of person she was referring to people and referring to them as souls, which I think particularly was an Edwardian and a Victorian way of speech. What is a soul? What is a spirit? I mean, whether the spirit and the soul are identical or whether they're separate in themselves, quite honestly, I don't know how to answer the question. Other than, I think when she said all those many souls around me, she meant the various people, and she referred to them as souls. I mean, we get some spiritualists who talk about having a soul mate. And I suppose if you're very happily married and you really are in love, then it's very nice to have a soul mate. But I'm sure there are some people who look all the time when they get away. They're not soul mates. I'm being very naughty. Let's have a little facetious. Yes, love.
Since all communication is a mental process, does this rule out sound from speech between people on the other side?
Oh, no. I see what you mean. No. The point is that it seems from what they have told us over many years, and different people have said much the same thing, that when they've been there for quite a while and they adjust themselves to their new way of life, they realise that there are many things which, when they were on earth, were essential or necessary, are no longer essential or necessary to them there, and that they can communicate in a mental way without having to utilise the vocal organs and create sound. For instance, I mean, people like Peter and people like Caruso on occasions, that's cropped up about great singers, you know, like Callas and people like that. Well, to them, not to be able to sing would be a living death, we might say, but there's no doubt that they can. In fact, they talked about music, they talked about musicians, they talked about composers, they talked about Chopin has composed new works over there, and Beethoven, etc., and that they have piano, and they have a much wider, longer keyboard, much more able to express things that they couldn't have expressed here because of the confines of the keyboard. So they obviously do have sound. But to anyone who has truly advanced, it is not. I mean, this happens to us anyway. I mean, two people who are very close, husband and wife or whatever, they'll be sitting one winter's evening by the fire, and one may say to the other, "Isn't it funny, we haven't heard from Harry lately?" The other one says, "Good God, I was just thinking about it, and next minute the telephone rings, and there's Harry." You see, we don't know enough about the mind, and that's another reason why we should be analytical about mediums, including me. Because we don't know how much the power of thought can, by its very nature, bring about various things that happen, even in a science room. You see, successful sciences or successful communication, by its very nature, can only take place when there is complete harmony between the sitters and the medium and the people on the other side. When you get this beautiful harmony, that's why a home circle is better than anything else in spiritualism. Believe me, I was brought up in the flavor of a home circle. You can cut out everything else to do with spiritualism, and you won't miss all that much. But if you sit in your home with sincere, honest, dedicated people and develop the natural gifts of the Spirit, there is nothing that is not possible. And you know it's honest, and you know it's true, because it's happening in your own condition and your own environment. There's nobody there who's been paid for their services. There's nobody there who's got an inflated head and think that they're the cat's whiskers because they've been advertised as psychic news or something of that. In fact, the truth of the matter is, the more sincere and humble, and the more we are together in sincerity and in love and in harmony, particularly in our own environment, that is the home, that is the cradle, the home circle. I have known great mediumship that has developed in the home. That is the best place to develop mediumship, and where you'll get the finest mediumship. Because unfortunately, often with mediums, and I include myself, when we get a lot of publicity and we're greatly sought after in one's own human, there's a tendency to try and do too much. People besiege you for appointments and expect so much of you, and they put you on a pedestal, and you've got a very strong character to resist all that. And the tendency is to do too much, and that's where the trouble lies. When they can't get it, they think, oh, yeah, well, I must give them something. Yes, and they can direct that, you know. I won't do it all that. Anyway, who's next? Because the time is nearly... Yes, sir?
Coming back to the voice box, would you say that all radix is used for destiny, or the...
Well, that is a question that's always popping up, and I think it's a very sensible question to ask, and it's a very honest question. As far as I am concerned, no. Because if they were using my writings, I would not, presumably, obviously, be able to enter into a discussion or ask questions. And because I suffer with a chest condition, and also because I sweat about too much, I get terrible fits of coughing, sometimes I'm sitting, and you can still hear the voices speaking, but I'm coughing. And also, of course, so much has been lost over the years, but in my book there are some photographs taken of the SPR sittings where they have a throat microphone connected to my throat, wired up to a speaker, taken in red light, the whole sound is held in red light, and I'm also tied in the chair. And if I made the slightest tiz or noise in my throat, it would come boom to the loudspeaker. Well, nothing like that happened with the sound of that particular sound. So it rather indicates that as far as I'm aware, personally concerned, I do not enter into it. But I will not admit that there is a possibility. There's always a possibility of mediumship, and one's honest about mediumship. But somewhere along the line, you cannot completely eradicate the medium. If the conditions are excellent, the medium is relaxed, he's happy because he's sitting with people he knows he can trust and they're sincere, and the whole attitude and atmosphere is conducive, then I don't think that the medium has any effect whatsoever on the phenomenon. But I do know there are subtleties. There are times when I've gone into the silence room, and perhaps I haven't felt too good, and I've sensed or felt something. I haven't been able to exactly say what it was, and I felt, well, I didn't know. And I myself, without wanting to do it, have inhibited the phenomenon. And another thing, before I finish, which I must finish because it's got half, but on rare occasions, for instance, often this happens, but on one occasion in mind that I had, a sitter said to an entity that was communicating, "Oh, darling, can you tell me, do you remember where you died?" Now, I try not to get caught up in it, because I think the less the medium has to do with any form of medium, the very less. But subconsciously or whatever, I was thinking, oh God, I hope we get it right, you know. And for a fleeting second, before the voice said it, I got Birmingham. The next second, the voice said Birmingham. So, in some subtle kind of way, I don't say it happens all the time, does this sort of, in some strange way, come via or through me or round me? I don't know. I wish I did know. But I do know there are occasions where a voice is saying something, and somebody asks a pertinent question, and I sort of think, oh, you know, don't forget, you know. And all of a sudden, before the voice reacts, I sometimes mentally get a word or a sentence or something, which suggests to me that you cannot completely cut out the thought mentality. Somehow it's all caught up together. It's a fascinating subject. Believe me, this is the most fascinating subject to go into. You've got to be kindly critical and analytical, you've got to be infinitely patient, you've got to make allowances for all sorts of things that can happen, and you've got to be very sort of sympathetic towards the medium and the situation in which you may find yourself in with that medium. In other words, trying to see this, that we are all searching in our own way, individually and I hope collectively, for truth. We may have a facet of truth here, we may have a facet of truth there, but none of us, no doubt, can see the whole brilliance of the intensity of the beauty of the whole. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. You get 2 or 3 little pieces, you put them together, and you begin to see something coming into view, and you get the light and the shade, and then you get another little piece that doesn't seem to fit, and then another little piece that fits that piece, and gradually, by years of experience, you see the picture developing and coming into shape. And this is what it's all about, spiritualism in a way. You get a little evidence here, and a little help there, and a little comfort somewhere else, and then all of a sudden, you may be fortunate enough to get something so dynamic that then you know with a certainty that this is true. So don't cast aside anything that seems trivial or unimportant, because it may turn out to be much more important. But in this search for truth, we each and every one